listening to that, Susan Smith, co-director of the group For Women Scotland, which campaigned against recent proposed changes to gender law, amongst other things. Susan, good morning.
Good morning, Emma.
What do you take issue with this particular act?
Well, the first thing is obviously, as you've said, that sex is not included. And that was actually a key recommendation of the original independent review undertaken by Lord Brackendale when he was looking at existing hate crime and trying to formulate a new plan. And he specifically recommended that there'd been a missed opportunity back in 2008 when it was last looked at. So he suggested that sex should go in. It would prevent duplication. It would reflect the protected characteristic that exists already in the Equality Act, and that training of the police and the judicial system to deal with what we know is an epidemic of violence against women could begin. We know that crime generally is taken more seriously if it attracts a hate crime aggravator. So often crimes against women which do not have this aggravator are treated less seriously than an equivalent crime against another protected characteristic. We have a really, really mad thing in here where one of the characteristics that are protected under transgender identity are people who occasionally cross-dress. And the example given by the Equality Network, who pushed for this, was that this might cover somebody going to the Rocky Horror Show. So we've got this absurd situation where a man who is dressed up in stockings for a night out, for a bit of a joke, and is a victim of crime, could make a complaint under a hate crime report, whereas a woman who's similarly attacked and is wearing slightly risque clothing could well be asked in court whether her clothing choice contributed to this attack.
It'd have to get to court though, wouldn't it? So rather than going through a long list here, there is the reality of these two criteria that we just had laid out that would have to be cleared: malice or ill will, or intended to stir up hatred. And for those and what I was going to say was, for those who support these additions, perhaps they would say the threshold is hard. It's taken this long to get here because the threshold had to be at that level. Does that give you any comfort?
Well, not really. So that was to clarify, the first part I was saying was on the hate crime in general. That's the aggravator. So that's when you've actually committed a crime. The stirring up is much more vague and has this abusive or threatening behaviour clause. And they talk about, as John said, this test for a reasonable person. Now, I feel that if you are, for example, a minister in the Scottish government, you should be a reasonable person. But Patrick Harvey, who's an MSP and part of Humza Yousaf's cabinet, has been calling colleagues transphobes for years now when they've spoken out about women's rights. Is Patrick Harvey not a reasonable person? I think it's very difficult. I think the police have been put in an impossible situation. I think when things
Patrick's not here to reply to your example, but you think this is not going to be a situation where the police can separate this out because of this law?
I think the police training, as John also said, has been thoroughly inadequate, not fit for purpose, was what the chair of the Police Federation described it. And the problem is they've said they'll investigate everything. So it's almost inevitable that some people will be investigated. They will have their lives upended. They'll have equipment taken. And as we know, most people these days rely on their laptops. They rely on their phones, especially people for work or for caring responsibilities. And that could go on for 18 months, 2 years. And then you get to court and they say this does not meet the tests and it's thrown out. But that doesn't give anybody back that period of their life when they've been put through the mill. And so the process very much becomes the punishment. And this could all have been avoided because right back at the beginning, during the later stages of the bill, there was an attempt to put in free speech amendments. There was an outcry on Twitter. Nicola Sturgeon directly intervened and made Humza Yousaf pull them. He then promised at committee, he promised me and Lucy Hunter-Blackburn that we would be involved in drafting guidance and giving examples so the police would understand if somebody like J.K. Rowling made a thread like that on Twitter, for example. We could have had real world examples for the police to use in training. But what happened was he broke those promises because ministers decided that it would upset the trans lobby if those examples were given in the guidance to the police.
But J.K. Rowling has there's no action been taken so far. There may not be. And if there isn't, does that assuage any of your concerns? Because it's an example. She's thrown it down. She said, arrest me. She's on holiday at the moment, but when she gets back, she said, go on, do your worst. And if it doesn't happen, it may then show what you're saying to be a concern, fair enough, but it won't come to pass, perhaps.
Well, possibly not. I'm not sure that's a really sensible basis for policing or legislation, though, to live
No, I wasn't saying as a basis. I just meant, trying to, as you're talking about real world examples, and this is what's difficult, isn't it? When something's just come in, you're trying to get to grips with it, and there's intention, and then there's the process becoming, as you say, the punishment. I've interviewed so many people with all sorts of issues like this where the process has actually been worse than what then eventually happened, far from examples like of this sort of nature. But it's about whether people can trust, I suppose, the authorities and the police with the law that has been written to have the right response. And it sounds, what I'm trying to understand from you is, do you not think they can have, a sort of proportionate response with the way that this has been written, or do you not trust the police full stop to do so?
I think the police have been put in a really difficult position because what we are hearing from them about their guidance is that it's thoroughly inadequate, and some of it is contradictory, and the signals that are going out are completely contradictory. I mean, we had a ridiculous campaign featuring the hate crime monster, and the police talking about, well, the hate crime monster video said, before you know it, you've committed a hate crime. Now, obviously, we're told that you have to have intent to commit a hate crime, but the actual publicity material from the police is saying you could commit a hate crime without knowing it. There are huge posters up around Scotland now saying if you read something on the internet that upsets you, you can report it as a hate crime. So the messaging from the police and government is completely at odds with what they are saying is the reality of the bill and of the act. Sorry, Hamza Yousaf says you can still be done for wasting police time.
Although, the SNP's Victims and Community Safety Minister, Siobhan Brown, has described the Act as ambitious, while also insisting it would not necessarily criminalise anything that was not already criminal. And building on that point in terms of the SNP's ambitions, to use that word, just to say there is obviously a specific misogyny law that's coming in due course. If women had been included, some may have argued, well, the situation with women, as you said yourself, is so serious, it should have its own. This sex and women specifically should have its own category. What do you say to those women who feel reassured, perhaps, that that is coming and will be treated very seriously because it's on its own?
I think if it was as serious as they claim it should be, and as I believe it is, they would have done something already. There was no need, particularly, to tidy up the existing hate crime law if you were going to leave out sex, because that was the major part of Brackadale's recommendation. So we've had a long period of time where women haven't been included. We're going to have a longer period of time, frankly, because I don't think many people have a lot of trust in the SNP to deliver on this. They have dragged their feet over so many proposals, including bringing in, for example, the Nordic model, which they promised before this parliament they were going to act on. So I'm not sure I trust them to bring in this misogyny law. I think it's jammed tomorrow from them.
Well, I can't ask them. I'd like to be able to. A representative was asked to come onto the programme. We haven't heard back from the SNP this morning, which I hope we can rectify perhaps tomorrow's programme. We are getting quite a few messages, as you would expect, on this. If you're just joining us, that was Susan Smith, co-director of the Group for Women Scotland, which campaigned against recent proposed changes to gender law and some serious concerns around this law. Thank you very much, Susan Smith. A message here. J.K. Rowling has only said what the majority of women think and feel. She's placed herself in the firing line of trans activists and misogynists because she has the capacity to do so without having her career destroyed. There is a conflict between what are described by some as gender critical beliefs and trans ideology, and she's highlighting that beautifully.